We've been talking about Genesis, and where are we in the story of Genesis?
Jacob and Esau.
Okay, yeah, okay, we're right on the threshold of Jacob and Esau. Where have we been in a nutshell? What have we talked about?
The Garden of Eden.
Okay, we started with creation, and then the Garden of Eden,
Yeah.
and Noah and Abraham.
The sacrifice that didn't happen.
The sacrifice that didn't happen, or the human sacrifice that didn't happen.
Right.
That poor ram who had his horns caught, he didn't last long. Yeah, but the human, yeah. So we went through that. And what are some, we've looked at these stories, and we've looked at some others, what has been a thread that's kind of connected these stories?
God.
Okay,
Faith.
God becomes a thread because in all of them, God is always involved. You said faith. Faith seems to be another thread. Obedience seems to be another thread. So we've got all these stories, and you know, when you think about stories that make up a story, you know, we've got these little stories that are making up this bigger story. And the bigger story is really a story about God and how human beings have responded to God. And a God who makes promises and who is working through humanity to make those promises come true. Now, we talked about Abraham a lot because he seems to be, you know, an important figure. He is now gone. And the focus is falling on his children, and in particular one of his children, because he's got a bunch of them, but we have two that we've really looked at, Ishmael and Isaac, but we know the promise is going to go through Isaac. And last week, what happened with Isaac? What did we see last week with Isaac?
Trying to find a woman.
Okay, trying to find a wife. And that's kind of what Abraham did. You know, tried to find a wife and wanted it from his own family,
Not the, what do they call them? Hittites?
not the Canaanites.
Canaanites.
Because you know,
I knew it was
what do we know about
They're
Canaanites?
bad people.
They are no good. No good. Hittites aren't much better. We'll find that out today.
I knew it was a type.
Yeah, they're all ites. There's a bunch of ites, termites. You know, they're all over the place. So there's a lot of ites. We're going to have Edomites coming up soon. But Jacob wanted, so he sends his servant, and who does he end up finding?
Rebekah.
Okay, finds Rebekah. And Rebekah and her brother's name is Laban, and only mention it because he's going to be important in a future story. You know, he's going to be, really at the end of what we're looking at today. He's going to play a role, and certainly next week. So if we believe that God made the promise to Abraham, what was God going to give? What was his side of the covenant? He's going to give land, and he's going to give animals, and he's going to give descendants. He's going to give. There's going to be a lot of people. So we've got Isaac here. So we're going to make the assumption that God is going to do what for Isaac? Going to be land. Going to be blessings to Isaac. Okay. So we've got Isaac and Rebekah. So we can expect what from Isaac and Rebekah?
Children.
We would expect children, right?
Yes.
Now, when we at verse 19, we've got in chapter 25, we've got Abraham, we've got the compiler, because he's putting together, the redactor's putting together these stories. How does he begin in verse 19 or 25?
It says it's the account of Abraham's son.
Okay, we get the descendants. So we got a little break here. Now, just as an aside, remember the chapters in the Bible were given much later. You know, they aren't even close to original. They were done in 800 800 AD. So we're talking about a long time after they started giving chapters. And verses even later. So we don't worry that we've got something new starting in the middle of a chapter. That's no big deal. The chapters were added much, much later. So we've got verse 19 seems like a new idea starting because that's a nice break. Because the redactor is saying, okay, let me tell you about the descendants of Abraham. Abraham's dead. Now we've got Isaac, and he's married to Rebekah, and a little bit of her background, which we already know. And we've got Isaac praying to God. And why is Isaac praying to God?
On behalf of his wife, because she was barren.
She is barren. I'm experiencing deja vu all over again. Who was barren?
Sarah.
Sarah was barren, his mom. Now his wife is barren as well. Throw a dart, you're going to hit a barren woman in Genesis. I mean, they're just all over the place. And why would this idea of the women, particularly in this line of the patriarchs, why would it be so significant that they are barren? Sarah was barren, Rebekah's barren, we're going to have Rachel, she's going to be barren. Why? Why is that sort of in these stories?
Because God has a plan for later on, and it is not that time for them to have kids.
Okay, and he's going to overcome this, because to the rest of the world, barren means,
Childless.
you're not going to be knitting any booties anytime soon. I mean, that's just out of the picture. And so all of these God's going to overcome, especially since the promise is grounded in descendants. Okay, so she is barren. Now, what ends up happening? He goes to God, which shows, and prays, which shows what, or doesn't go to God, he goes to the Lord. And why is that significant that he's going to the Lord?
Because the Lord is here, it's more personal.
Well, right, and what did we say?
Because it was God and Lord before the
Okay, we've got these different strains of stories that a person or people put together into one, and one of them uses the name Lord to refer to the deity, and the other one uses the word God. And they generally don't blunder. And so you've got, when you're looking at a story where the deity is called the Lord, it's kind of consistent. And what are some of the characteristics, we talked about that, of those stories?
It seems like they're more personal.
They're very personal. Right down to the Lord does what?
Answers.
He appears. Yeah, he answers. He talks directly. God, on the other hand, appears in visions and in dreams, and God speaks from heaven, and that kind of thing. It's a less personal. And since they're different strains of stories, we see how different people at different times have perceived the deity. What's kind of cool is the redactor has brought those two strains together into one story. Unlike in the Gospels, where we have 4 Gospels, what they did, instead of having 4 versions, what they did is they combined it into one. Okay, so we've got this Lord story, and we said before, what was in the covenant in the Lord story? What did the promise was the same? And God's stories, Lord's stories. God's promise, the Lord's promise was the same. Land and descendants. But what the Lord was looking for was different than what God looked for. What did the Lord want from Abraham? And what's going to be the basis?
Obedience.
Not obedience from the Lord. That was from God.
Okay.
The Lord wanted faith. The Lord was looking for faith. God wants obedience. That's why God says circumcision. Boom. You don't have to believe. You got to get circumcised. And so we've got a slightly different. Now, the person inspired by the Spirit who puts this together believes both are important. That's why he includes both. But as we look at it, we see these different things. So when we see Lord, we're going to assume that faith is important in the Lord story. And what does Isaac do that shows faith? He asks him. He goes to God in prayer. He doesn't, do something else, obey something. He's going to go to God in prayer. And since he shows faith and God is faithful to his promise, what happens with Rebekah? Okay, she becomes pregnant, and she becomes pregnant with twins. And clearly it was easy. It was an easy pregnancy, right?
I don't think
No, it wasn't. What were the twins doing?
Fighting the whole.
They were fighting. They were fighting the whole time. Which, again, he's shaping this story. These stories are being shaped. What might the writer of this story be suggesting about the future relationship between the twin
They'd be
boys?
fighting.
Yeah, that this is not going to be a peaceful relationship between these two boys. What does she do?
She gives birth to them.
Well, before she gives birth to him, because here these two are struggling. And Rebekah says, I think what any woman would say,
Why is this happening?
why is this happening to me? Why am I going through this? And she asks the Lord, right?
Yes.
And what does the Lord say to her?
That just two nations are in
Okay,
one.
that you got two nations within you, okay? Now, remember, one of the things we also said when we looked at other stories is this is being compiled, much later. And Israel or Judah is a nation surrounded by nations. And one of the things the writer, we've seen it happen before, he'll identify the origin of some of the nations, and I'll say modern nations, modern to them who are reading this the first time. He'll identify the origin of some of those modern nations. And so far, none of them have been very good. I mean, the Canaanites, what's their origin?
They came from Cain.
They came from Canaan. And what was the problem with Canaan?
He killed. See the one?
He didn't kill.
He had the mark.
Yeah, well, Cain had the mark on him. Remember, Canaan was in the Noah story. Remember what happened in the Noah story?
Yeah, the earth was flooded.
Earth was flooded, but Canaan got a curse on him. Why did Canaan get a curse?
Oh, he's seen his dad.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
man.
Noah was naked, and Ham saw him, and Canaan saw him, and that caused a lot of problems. So he had a curse. So the Canaanites, if you say, well, Daddy, gosh, I'm so proud to be a Canaanite, and you talk to he goes home crying, and why are you crying, son? Well, the Jewish kid in the class, he said, our ancestors saw their ancestor naked, and that's why we're cursed.
Oh my God.
That's terrible. Well, but that wasn't the only nation that is kind of portrayed in a negative way. Remember Lot?
His wife,
Yeah, and his wife turned into a pillar of salt. What happened after his wife turned into a pillar of salt? That story that Judy never shared with her children in Bible class. What was the story? And I've never shared either.
daughters.
Yeah, the daughters. The daughters. Because there's not any men around, so let's get Dad drunk. And
Oh,
they
yeah.
have kids, and one of them becomes the father of the Moabites, and the other one becomes the ancestors of the Amorites. And so, again, two nations that Israel would have known, the people in Judah would have known about, because they were established sort of nations around Judah. And, the writer is saying, look, don't be proud if you're a Moabite. Look at how you started. And that's something the writer has done. He's doing the same thing. He's going to do the same thing.
I wonder what the father said when he realized what happened.
I cannot even imagine.
So they would be his sons or daughters, but also his grandchildren. That's really weird.
Yeah, there seems like there's a joke in there somewhere. But it's not a good thing. Okay, so anyway, we got two nations. So just file that away. He says two nations that are struggling inside. So both are going to carry promise, sort of, but one is going to be more important than the other.
The second one's more important than the rule of his brother.
The second one is going to be more important than the first one. The younger one's going to be more important than the older. Now we've kind of heard this before, right?
Yeah.
When have we encountered this same situation before, where the younger is going to have priority over the older?
Cain and Abel.
Well, we had Cain and Abel. Cain kind of took care of that, when he killed Abel. even more recent than that, where the younger becomes more important than the older.
Was it?
Yes, Ishmael and Isaac, remember? We got Ishmael and Isaac, and which one is older? Ishmael's older, but who's going to carry the promise? Isaac is going to carry the promise. But, we got two different mothers, right? So they say, it has to do with mothers. But in this case, we got two boys, same dad, same mom, right? Mm-hmm. One is going to be older, but going to be older by minutes, right? We're not talking about years. We're going to, unless it was really a tough delivery. It's going to be minutes, right?
Yes.
So this is kind of a unique situation. And in this case, these twin boys, the younger is going to have authority over the older. Now, in the New Testament, and we read it, who picks up on that and makes that important? Who uses that image to describe God? You remember? Because we studied it, or we studied what he wrote
About who?
about Jacob, the two boys that'll be delivered, Jacob and Esau. You remember what writer in the New Testament used that? If you look in Romans chapter 11 or chapter 9, Paul will say we'll talk about Jacob and Esau, and how Esau, although is first, will serve Jacob. And Paul's point is, you know what? God can do what God wants to do.
What was that, Romans what?
It's in Romans chapter 9. And Paul, because he says, and Paul will quote, because Malachi, it'll be in Malachi too, will say, and that Malachi is very strong, he'll quote Malachi, that God chose to love Jacob and to despise or hate Esau. And Paul says, God's in control.
Wonder why.
Why did Paul say God chose Jacob and not Esau? Remember, we talked about it.
He used to be one of the nations.
Yeah. Why would it be Jacob and not Esau?
He didn't like one of them.
Yeah, he didn't. But Paul says before they had done anything, good or evil. So it wasn't based on God knew Jacob was going to be a nice guy, and knew Esau was going to be. Paul says that's not the reason. God chose to love one and hate the other. Why? Remember, Paul says God's intention is always two words we used a lot. They were two words, Barb, you used a lot when we were looking at Romans.
One was it motivation?
Now, wasn't Moses, but it starts with an M.
Yeah.
Mercy.
And goodness. No.
Compassion. Mercy and compassion. God's will is always mercy, always compassion. And he chose Jacob for Paul. This is what Paul said. He chose Jacob over Esau so that God could show mercy and compassion to who? Jacob and Esau. Because it's going to be through Jacob that Jesus Christ is going to come. So God is actually showing great mercy and compassion to Esau and his descendants by choosing Jacob. That's what Paul will say. That's how Paul explains what's happening here. But right here, we're not. That's Paul. That's much later. But we do have this promise, which shows that God is, certainly at the very least, shows what? The Lord is
in charge.
In charge. If the Lord chooses one over the other, one's gonna be over the other.
Yeah.
And who knows that? Who knows that God has chosen the younger over the older?
Probably Jacob.
Who knows that?
No.
Well, in this story,
Isaac.
who knows this?
Father.
The mother knows it.
Yeah.
Rebekah knows it. Doesn't say anybody else knows it, but Rebekah knows it. And we want to keep that in mind as we look at the rest of the story. So Rebekah knows that the youngest is going to be in charge. And the oldest is going to serve.
Trickery.
Now that kind of opens up what happens later. Okay. And the two boys are born. And the first one born is named Esau. And Esau is described in a way that every mother would want her newborn described. He is what?
Red and hairy.
He is red and hairy. He looks like a little orangutan. You know, he is a red and hairy rascal. And so they name him Esau, which means red. So that's what they call him. They call him red. Now his brother comes out
Holding his heel.
holding Esau's heel. And since he's holding his heel, they name Jacob.
Jacob.
And Jacob means, in a sense, Jacob means,
Deceives.
what's that?
Deceives.
Deceive, yes. The deceiver, supplanter, you know, it's kind of, it wasn't in Hebrew, but it's, in English it kind of applies. Jacob was a heel. He really was a heel. He was a piece of work, you know, and we're going to see a little bit of it in what we're looking at. We're going to see a lot of it next week. Jacob, they named him, imagine naming your little baby, you know, cheat, deceiver, you know, that's pretty rough.
Yeah.
I mean, calling your baby red and hairy, that's bad enough, but calling him cheat, hey, come here, little cheater, you know.
Oh, geez.
But that's what Jacob was named, which gives us insight into what's going to happen in the story. Now, Rebekah knows, though, that Jacob's going to be in charge, Esau's going to serve Jacob. Who doesn't know?
Isaac.
Isaac doesn't know. Isaac doesn't know. No indication that Isaac knows. And Isaac is 6 years old. We're not going to worry about that because they're using a different calendar than we use. Okay, what happens when they grow up? And this is really interesting. Didn't hit me until I was going through it today. What happens when they grow up?
One's a hunter.
Okay, one's a hunter. Now, who is the hunter? Esau is a hunter, man of the field. And Jacob is
Farmer.
a quiet man. And he's living in tents. And I think that's really good. And it didn't hit me until today that this may be just a tiny, and you look for little things in here, a tiny commentary about life, especially since this is given to people later. You know, civilizations advance. As civilizations advance, what do? What's one thing civilizations do when they advance?
Grow and become civil.
They grow and become civil. And to grow and to become civil, you got to settle down. Mm-hmm. You can't be wandering around all over the place. You settle down. You become farmers. That's what you do, you know, as civilization develops. You don't get your food by doing what?
Killing.
Running around and finding game. You know, you move, they call them hunters and gatherers, you know, where they hunt and gather food. But you have to wander around all the time because you're always looking at game. When civilizations develop, they settle down. And they have herds, and they plant crops. And you don't have to move around. In fact, moving around becomes a disadvantage. Because if you got a farm, you can't be following the herds somewhere out there, you know, to get game to bring home to survive. We're not talking about hunting for sport. We're talking about hunting to survive. You know, and if your civilization is depending on hunting to survive, you're not going to be developing a whole lot. You're not going to, because you're not settling down. You don't have the opportunity to think and develop tools and such that you develop if you decide. So I think this becomes a little tiny, you know, an insight into where the people were who were reading this. You know, they were settled down. So as they read it, Jacob represented sort of the modern man, and Esau,
Caveman.
kind of. That's the guy of the past. You know, so it's really easy for us to read it and see, well, he was a hunter. Oh, that's good. He was hunting for sport. No, he's hunting to survive. You know, he's a hunter-gatherer. And that's what people generally don't do in sophisticated civilizations. Anyway, but we know something about Esau and Jacob.
Well, Rebekah loved Jacob.
Rebekah loved Jacob. Now remember, Rebekah knows about Jacob, right? But Daddy loves Esau. Loves Esau. Okay. Now we got Jacob and Esau. What happens in verse 29?
Oh, he wanted to eat
Esau
some
can
stew.
have-
Okay,
Hungry.
Esau's been out.
He's hungry.
He's hunting. He's been out, and he's hungry and he comes in, right? And what does Esau want?
Red stew.
Jacob is there making, and how could you resist a stew made of what?
Red meat.
Well, what does it say this stew is? Lentil. It's made as a lentil stew. Hot dog. I'll sell my what? Birthright for a pot of lentil stew. So he comes in, he's famished. He says, I want something to eat. Jacob says what?
First tell me your land.
Well, you give me your birthright. And you can have this bowl of red lentil stew. And Esau, reflecting this past time, where you survived by following herds and such, he says, well, you know what? It sounds like a deal to me. I'll give you my birthright for a bowl of stew. And
He
Jacob,
had to have been really hungry.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, he said he was famished.
Yeah.
I'm thinking. And this was the only food around, So he sells his. Now, what is a birthright? What does the birthright do?
What the father leaves to one of the sons to become the head.
Yeah. It's like
It's like Prince Charles.
you're in the will. You're going to stay in the will, right? So what he's selling is his place in line. He's selling his place in line. It would be like a prince. What, Andrew? Is that the older grandson of
Harry.
Charles? What are the two? One is Harry, and the other one is William. Okay, William and Harry. It's like William saying, to Harry, "Okay, I'll sell you my place in line." For a pot of red lentil stew. Yeah.
But
Megan wouldn't go for it.
if you can sell your birthright, then when they actually lied to their dad, so that the one pretended to be Esau, right?
Right.
And because his mother gave him Harry.
Right.
and-
We'll get there.
Oh, but I just
Yeah.
want to say, since he actually stole it from his brother, why can't his dad revoke that?
Can't do it.
Realize what happened.
Once he's good. Well, the birthright is different than the blessing. Because we got two
okay.
different things
Okay.
going on. We got a birthright, and that's your legal place in line. Because then the oldest would inherit double what the others would inherit.
Oh.
So what he's getting is he's getting the first. He doesn't inherit it all, but he gets more than his brother. So Esau is going to get less by this. But you look at this and say, why would he do it? Well, I can see kids doing this. Gosh, a teenager doing it. Not going to inherit anything soon. Dad's pretty healthy. Lord have mercy. I'll sell it for a pizza. When I'm 16 and I'm hungry, I'll sell it by birthright because I'm not going to see it in a long time. But Jacob knew, and so Jacob is sharp. And so Esau sells Jacob his birthright for a pot of stew. Now, are we surprised? Heck no. Why aren't we surprised? I said one person knows about Jacob and Esau, right? That Jacob is going to be first and Esau is going to be second. Rebekah knows. Who else knows? One other person knows. Well, God knows, right? What other person or persons knows?
Esau.
Jacob?
No indication Jacob knows. We can be 100% sure one other group of people know that Jacob is going to be first and Esau is going to be second. Rebekah knows. Who else
A
knows?
servant?
No indication.
The Lord.
I said that.
Yeah, that's God, certainly. But I'm talking about person, people. Think about it. Who knows? Same thing we saw in the Gospels. Over and over and over again.
Rebecca.
We know. We know. So, and that's important Because as we read these stories, we know who's going to win, right?
Oh, okay.
This is like I said about the old Columbo shows, where the murderer, you know the murderer at the beginning,
Yeah.
and the whole show is how he figures it out. We know who's going to win. Who's going to win? Jacob's going to win. There's no contest. So we know he's going to. The question is, how is he going to come out on top? But we know. So we're a part of this. We're looking down on the story. We're not standing by Isaac. We're standing by Rebekah. We know what she knows because the writer of the story told us. And that's really important for us to remember. Okay, so we've got this deal with so Jacob now has the birthright. He is now going to be regarded as number one. And that's where we end chapter 25, right? And if we didn't get into chapter 26, we could continue with the idea of 25. But 26, we're off to something new, right? What's going on in 26?
There's a famine.
Okay, now we got a famine in the land. Okay, so we got a new story. And what does Isaac do with this famine in the land?
He goes to, how do you say it, Amalek?
Abimelech. Now, we have seen Abimelech before, right? When did we see a guy named Abimelech, a king named
Wasn't that
Abimelech?
where he went up and wanted to buy the land to bury?
Yeah, it was a deal with the well.
Yeah.
With who? Or with whom?
Abraham.
With Abraham. We also have, with Abimelech, Abraham lying about Sarah to Abimelech. So Abimelech has been in the story before, right? Or this name. I don't think it's all that important, but it's something that's kind of interesting. This time, though, Abimelech is associated with what people?
Oh, there's one we don't like.
What's the Philistines? Now we got a historical problem here. The Philistines are not going to show up where they are until about 1200 BC. This is supposed to have taken place way before. That's good English, isn't it? That's really good. There weren't no Philistines.
That's a good teacher for you.
Yeah, that's good. That's why I taught history. And not English. Couldn't add either. That's why I didn't teach math.
Thank God.
Yeah, amen. There were no Philistines. So clearly this is a story that's been shaped later about Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, because historically there weren't any Philistines. Right. But there were Philistines around when the people were reading the story. So they knew where they lived, and they knew the Philistines were really, really powerful. Okay, so we've got Abimelech, the Philistines. What happens with Isaac and Abimelech? There's a famine in the land, and what happens?
Isaac hears from the Lord.
Okay, Isaac hears from the Lord, a Lord story, okay? The Lord appears to Isaac. That's what the Lord does. He appears. And then what?
Told him not to get down to
Okay,
Egypt.
don't go to Egypt, but
Here's where I want you to go.
I want you to go here. Now, you're going to be a stranger. You're going to be an alien in the land, but what does the Lord say to him?
Go to the
He'll
land.
bless them and keep his
Yes.
promise.
What does the Lord do for Isaac here? That's really important.
He is in land and this
He promises him land and
descendants.
descendants. Experiencing deja vu?
Yes.
Yeah, when did we hear that before? Abraham. So the Lord is doing for Isaac the same thing the Lord did
Abraham.
for Abraham. Okay? So we've got the covenant restated. So if there was any question about who is going to carry the covenant, it's answered here. The Lord makes his covenant with Isaac. And Isaac goes and settles in the land. And like father, like son. Because what does Isaac do when he settles in the land?
He lies about his wife.
He lies about his wife. And says his wife is his sister. And he does it for good motivation.
So they won't kill
So
him.
they won't kill him to get to
Her.
Rebekah.
Beautiful.
Okay. Which we have seen before, right? Because his daddy did it once. Twice, yes, twice. Although this story isn't nearly as dramatic. Because in the other stories, Pharaoh and Abimelech, took Sarah, or Sarai and Sarah, into their harem. In this case, Abimelech doesn't. But Isaac is saying that Rebekah is his sister. And this is another story we don't teach the kids. What does Abimelech see when he's looking out the window?
He sees touching her, caressing her.
Yeah. They're getting down.
Yeah.
They're getting busy. Isaac and Rebekah, right? And that's what Abimelech sees. And Abimelech is not an idiot. He's thinking what?
You're gonna kill all.
Yeah, no, this is not what one would do with his sister. Something fishy is going on. And what does Abimelech do?
He went and confronted him about it.
Why did you say she was your sister when obviously
She's your wife.
she is your wife, right? Okay. And Abimelech takes the next step. He says, well, I'm glad I found this out, because if I didn't find it out,
She could have been.
a lot of people the whole country could have been cursed. So he says, nobody is allowed to mess with
Either one.
either one of them. Okay. Now, what does as the story continues? So this is not a real savory story about Isaac. Why would the writer include this? Why would the writer? He didn't have to include this.
Nobody is perfect. Everybody's sinned.
Okay, well that's why is that so important that be associated with Isaac? We said the same thing with Abraham. The temptation is to view Abraham as sort of this
Sinless.
superhero,
Yeah.
that we honor. Oh, he doesn't even walk on real land. He's better than us. And the same thing, you could look at the patriarchs. These are great men. You respect them. You worship them. And he's saying, this story is included. Isaac is not great. Now, what ends up happening, though, to Isaac in the land?
He planted crops and
He planted crops. Very interesting that he plants crops, because to this point, what was Abraham?
what was who?
What was Abraham? How did Abraham make his living?
Was a nomad.
He was a nomad. He followed herds around, right? What is Isaac, his son, doing?
Farmer.
He's a farmer.
He's planting crops. He's farming. Really interesting. They don't make a big deal of that, but I think it's really interesting when you go back to Jacob and Esau. Esau is a hunter-gatherer. That's how he survives. Esau is a man of the tent. He's settled down. And that's what Isaac is doing. He's planting crops. Man, you can't follow herds around. When you're planting crops, you're away from them too long. Okay, but he does have herds, but he's a farmer, with his flocks around him. Now, what's the reaction? Is he a good farmer?
Must be.
Yes.
Must be, because he has bumper crops. Now, we don't look at that and say, ooh, he must have been a sharp guy, even though he's not explicitly mentioned, or maybe he is. What is the Lord doing for?
Blessing them.
Yes.
The Lord is blessing him, right? So the Lord is there, even though, he's getting these crops. It's because the Lord is with him. What's the reaction of the Philistines?
They're jealous.
Okay, they're jealous. All right, they're jealous of him because of his success. Now, then we got this interesting little tidbit. What have the Philistines done?
They asked him to move.
I mean, and it's sort of an aside. What did they end up doing?
They asked him
They
to
filled
move.
up the wells that Abraham had dug. The Philistines have filled up. Now that's a big deal when you're in an arid country. They filled up the
Well, I couldn't
wells.
understand why they did that.
Well, why would you do that?
Maybe
They
to
wanted
force
to be
somebody out.
successful.
I don't know why you would do that.
Force somebody out.
Well, clearly the writer wants to make a point because he mentions it. If he didn't mention it, we'd have never wondered about it. But the wells are filled up, which means there aren't wells around anymore. Okay, so what ends up happening? So Isaac is successful, right? What does Abimelech do with respect to Isaac.
Asked him to leave.
He asks him, he goes, you're too powerful for us, right?
I don't understand that, why he, since he was so blessed and he was rich and everything, why he would ask them to move because of him being rich and powerful.
Because he wasn't afraid that they would take over.
Seems that would be the reason, that they feel threatened. They feel threatened by him. He is emphasizing, though, the writer is emphasizing what? When he says that Abimelech, this king, comes and says, you're too powerful for us. What is the writer emphasizing?
Then that he understood.
Understood
what was going to
what?
happen with all the
He was
wealth.
blessed.
That he was blessed by
Yes.
God. This is, the king is saying, man, you're too powerful. And the writer's already said, he's powerful because God is the Lord is blessing him, right? Mm-hmm. All the wells have been filled, right? We had another story with Abimelech and wells, right? Only it was with Abraham. What Isaac needs a well, right? Mm-hmm. What does he do?
Reopened the wells.
He has his servants dig, and what happens?
They were successful.
Boom, you got water. Well, you can get lucky, right? He digs another well.
Then there's the water.
Boom, you got water. You dig another well.
Water.
Boom, you got water. What's happening?
He's being blessed over and over.
He is being blessed over and over and over again, right?
And for them to fill in the wells was a dangerous thing to do.
Well, it doesn't make any
You don't have that
sense.
much water, yeah.
It doesn't make any sense, but it does set us up for
What's coming.
the digging of new wells
Yes.
and the water over and over and over. And remember, they're telling stories. They're not recording history. They're telling stories. And so all these wells are filled in, and when Isaac needs a well, he digs it. Bang, hits water. Hits water. Hits water. Every single time he sinks a well. Okay? What ends up happening to Isaac and Bathsheba? So we know the Lord is with him. We know the Lord is blessing him. What ends up happening?
They are asked to move.
They're asked to move, and he does. And what happens when he goes to Bathsheba? When does he go? What happens when he's in Beersheba?
Oh, okay. The Lord appeared to him. And
The Lord appears to him again. And what does the Lord do?
I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham.
What is he doing?
Increasing the
A
number.
covenant again. So we've got this covenant reinforced to Isaac. And what eventually happens with the Philistines? What eventually happens with the Philistines?
They came to see him.
And he departs in peace. So the Philistine story kind of comes to an end, and he's still getting water. He's still putting down wells and getting water. Now, interesting little story kind of thrown in there. Really, what do we learn about Isaac as a result of this story? As a result of this story with Abimelech, what do we learn about Isaac and the Lord?
He has faith.
We got Isaac having faith.
He listens to what the Lord said, and he doesn't get angry and have a fight with him.
He doesn't have a fight. He doesn't go to war with him. What else do we get from this whole story? Everything we've looked at in 26. What do we learn about Isaac?
Isaac is a very strong man.
He is a strong man, although somebody might raise a hand in the back of the room and say, well, what did he do that didn't show a lot of strength?
He's obedient.
Well, yeah, okay, but somebody in the back of the room is going to say, all right, but wasn't Isaac the guy who lied about his wife because he was afraid he was going to be killed by the people? Is that a strong man?
No, not when he put his wife out there and see what could happen.
Yeah, is that a faithful man? I don't know.
Not to his wife.
Not to his wife. He sure didn't trust that God would protect him. Because he was afraid. So we've got this picture of Isaac that certainly involves, he's faith. He's showing faith, but who is really showing faith in this story?
His wife.
Well, we don't hear much about how his wife reacts. Who ends up being the most faithful in chapter 26? Isaac is sort of in and out. But who is constantly faithful? Well, Abraham is, yeah, he's going. Who is constantly faithful in the
I
whole
guess
chapter?
Abimelech, because he
Huh?
follows.
Esau.
Well, Esau's not in the story.
Yeah, Abimelech.
And Abimelech comes out looking a little better than Isaac.
Well, the Lord
The Lord is
Yeah,
faithful.
because He's filling the promise or the covenant.
Yes, again, just like we saw over and over again, this is the Lord's story. Isaac, he does good things, he does bad things. He sometimes just looks like he's really lucky because the Lord is with him. He's not doing anything for the Lord to be with him, but he is. He is. The Lord's blessing him. What is Isaac doing? What has Isaac done to get the blessing? Lied about his wife.
Yeah.
And he's got the blessing. What does it show? God is going to be with Isaac. Why is God going to be with Isaac?
Mercy.
Because yes, mercy and compassion. That's what Paul would say. God's going to be with Isaac because God promised to be with Isaac, and God does not what? Lie or go back on his word. And so Isaac is carrying the blessings of God, period. And we know who's going to carry the blessings afterwards. After Isaac's gone. Who's going to carry those blessings?
Esau?
Jacob. Because we know Jacob
Okay.
is going to be one and Isaac's going to be two. But the Lord is, in spite of who Jacob is, the Lord is going to be with Jacob just like he was with Isaac. Now, at the end of chapter 26, we got a little interesting story that we're going to come back to in just a little bit. Then we got something in between. What happens at the end of chapter 26,
Esau
like
marries
32?
a foreigner.
Okay, Esau marries
A Hittite.
a Hittite. Esau marries a Hittite. And remember I said Canaanites are what?
No
Canaanite
good.
women are
No good.
no good. Hittite women are
No good.
no good. If any of y'all are Hittites, I apologize.
I wrote that in my Bible, no good.
No good. Hittite women are no good. And evidently they are hard, they're an acquired taste. Because according to what the writer says, what is the relationship?
They don't get along.
They don't get along. And with who? Who is being driven nuts by this
Isaac and
Hittite
Rebekah.
woman? Isaac and Rebekah are being driven nuts. Fortunately, we in our society have outgrown that. In-laws never drive us nuts. So anyway, we've got this problem that's just thrown in there. That Esau marries a Hittite girl and is driving mom and dad crazy. All right. New chapter 27. What happens right at the beginning? Now, if you took chapter 26 out, you wouldn't lose anything. Because what happens at the beginning of chapter 27?
They started talking about Isaac dying.
Now we got Isaac, and his eyes are becoming, just follow this dying business back, because we're going to have something very interesting happen with Isaac and death. But we've got, Isaac's eyes are dim, okay? And he is coming to
The end of his life.
the end of his life. He is about to attend his last rodeo. He is now about to join the choir triumphant, to become the late Isaac, right? And he does what?
Asked to see his
Calls his eldest son, who we already know has done what?
Lied.
Well, this is Esau. We know Esau is a hunter-gatherer. We also know Esau has done what?
Given his birth.
Given his birthright. So we know that. Isaac calls in Esau, son. He says, my son. And Esau says, here I am. I've heard that before. one son saying to the father, here I am, or the father asking for the son and the son saying, here I am. When did we run across that same pattern? We saw it with Abraham and Isaac. Same sort of thing. When Abraham, and the son Isaac says, here I am, father. Okay, so we've got right here, and Isaac says to him, I am an old man. I am about to kick the bucket. I'm about to kick the bucket. I'd like you to do one thing for me before I die. What does Isaac say I want you to do?
Go out and kill some fresh meat.
Okay. I want you to go and kill me some game because I really like the taste of venison. I really like venison. So I want you to make me, and you know that dish I enjoy so much? That venison dish I enjoy so much? Well, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I want you to make it for me. Okay. And Esau says, okay, Pop. And Isaac says, once you do that, I'm going to do something for you before I die. I am going to give you my blessing. Now, we got birthright. Who already has the birthright? Jacob has the birthright, right? Esau does not. His place in line, his legal financial place in line belongs to Jacob. But what Jacob doesn't have is the blessing. And what is the big deal with the blessing? What does the blessing convey? If the birthright conveys political power, if it conveys financial power, what does the blessing? Spiritual power. So the blessing is going to come from God through Isaac to Esau. Now, if Esau has the blessing, even though he doesn't have the full inheritance that he deserves, Esau is going to be in the sight of God what?
Chosen?
He's going to be chosen. He's going to be first in the sight of God. Who's listening as this conversation? Rebekah. Now, what does Rebekah know? What does Rebekah already know?
Yeah, that her son would not, her young son would not get the
Her
blessing.
favorite.
That Jacob is going to be the one to do what? What is Jacob going to do? He is going to carry the promise of God.
Yeah.
He needs the birthright, but he really needs the blessing. Because the blessing is carrying, that's something that God is offering. So he's going to carry, she already knows it. He's going to carry the blessing, right? Mm-hmm. Therefore, she knows that's going to happen. Therefore, the only thing that's in doubt is what? How she's going to get it, right? How is she going to get the blessing when Isaac has already decided he's going to bless Esau once he finishes
The stew.
the stew?
The meat, whatever.
Right. Okay. What does she do?
She calls her son to her and says, we're going to do this. And
Okay.
dresses him up.
Okay, Jacob.
Puts on Isaac's coat so he smells like him and puts something on his hands so he's hurt
Genesis does not put women in a very good light.
She says now, this is what he said to Esau, but she also tells him what? What's at the end of that? I heard your dad telling your brother, Esau, to make him his favorite meal, right?
Let the curse fall on me.
And, make the favorite meal. And then she tells Jacob what? Your dad said, I want Esau to make my favorite meal. And then I heard him say, he will bless it. That the blessing is going to come. Okay. Now, that's what she says before she makes the plan, right? Now, here's what we're going to do, Jacob. You're going to do what for me?
You defend your Esau.
You're going to, first thing, you're going to do what? You're going to bring me a goat. You're going to slaughter a goat. You're not going to make the meal. Who's going to make the meal?
She is.
Bring it to me. I'm going to make the meal your dad really likes. He really likes it. Okay, and he's gonna eat it. Now, that doesn't mean, so we're gonna snake out Esau, because what does Esau have to do?
He used to go hunting.
He's gotta get the game. He's gotta go out there. All Jacob has to do is go to the flock and get a goat. So Jacob should have an advantage, time advantage. And Jacob says to his mom, come on.
Yeah.
He's worried about it.
My skin's moving.
My skin is, and Dad is going to want to shake my hand. Even though his eyes are what?
Blind.
Dim, so he may not be able to, I may be just a blur. He can still feel my hands. And Rebekah said, I thought you'd ask that. This is what we're going to do. What are we going to do?
Deceive him.
We're going to deceive him. And we're going to deceive him by doing what?
Putting the goats.
Yeah, we're going to put some goat hair on your arm.
So his dad could-
And Jacob said, well, the trouble is, I like to wear cologne. I like cologne. I like brute cologne. And Dad's going to smell that. And Rebekah said, I thought about that too. You know what you can do? You can wear your brother's
jacket.
hunting jacket. That smells like Esau. Okay. So, and we all know how Esau smells, right? All right. Certainly is it too. He's going to wear the jacket and he's going to have the hairy hands with goat hair. And your dad is not going to know a thing. Okay? And Jacob, being the honest person he is, says, Mom, what does he
Curse will
say?
fall on me.
Well, that's what Rebekah says. Let the curse fall on me. Jacob said, because that's what Jacob is worried. If Dad finds out, what is Dad going to do? If Dad finds out I'm cheating him, what's Dad going to do?
Put a curse on
He's going to put a curse on me. And not only am I not going to get a blessing, I'm going to be cursed. And Rebekah says, don't worry about it, son. That curse will go on me. And Jacob, because this is not a moral act, is it? This is a terrible, deceptive act. And especially since Jacob does not have the insight that Rebekah has. It's not like he's doing this for the Lord. He's doing it for who?
Himself.
He's doing it for Jacob, right? And so Jacob says to his mom, now that you said the curse will fall on me, I'll do it. I'll do it. I see a lot of upside and very little downside. And so what does the writer tell us? Again, a wonderfully crafted story. Tells us in detail. What does Jacob do? Gets the goat, right?
Yep.
What does his mom do?
Cook it.
Cook it. What does Jacob do?
Get dressed like
Gets dressed up like his brother, puts on his hairy thing. If I wanted to imitate my brother, I wouldn't put hair on my hands. I'd have to put it.
on your head. I'm trying to answer what you want.
That's not what I want.
Chest.
Yeah, that's right.
And
On
back.
my chest. That's exactly right. Dad be doing this. Oh, you're not Gary. My hand is sticking. That's not your brother. And not oily like your. Well, that's neither here nor there. So he comes in, and I want you to get a feeling of who Jacob is. He comes in and says, "My father," right? Here I am. Who are you, who are you, my son? And Jacob says, I cannot tell a lie. I am Esau. I am Esau, and I have done what you told me. And eat real fast, Dad, so that you can
Bless me before my brother
so
comes
you
back.
can bless me before my brother, because and I like that. I am Esau, your firstborn. It's not even enough that he's going to say I'm Esau. I'm your firstborn. Man, he is laying it on.
But the thing
on
is, he
thick.
even says though that the voice is
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
Jacob's.
Well, he's got several problems.
Yeah.
He says, your first problem, son, you went out to hunt,
And you
to
got
get
back
game.
so fast.
Man, you got back really, really fast. You know, how could you have done that? Jacob, being the kind of guy Jacob is, what does Jacob say?
Are you really my son Esau?
Well, he says, what does Jacob say to his dad? Because his dad says, wait a minute, wait.
I am
I
Esau,
sent you
your
out to get a deer, and you're back in 20 minutes with this thing cooked? You gotta you explain this to me. And Jacob says, because he is such a godly person, he says what?
God.
Please eat out.
The Lord must have been with me. Oh, the Lord was guiding my arrow when it hit. Oh, so not only is he cheating his dad, he's doing what? Lying about God. He's lying about God. This guy, he should be looking around for lightning bolts,
Yes.
to come. But they aren't going to come because what do we already know? There ain't going to be any lightning bolts because what do we know? Jacob's going to carry the promise. This lousy excuse for a human being is going to carry God's promise. And he says, come near me, son, because you know something? Your brother doesn't have a southern accent. but you do. So I got to make sure you're Esau. And he said, come on, son. And what does Jacob do?
Go in here and let him feel his
Lord have mercy. Feels his
Yeah.
hands. And he says,
And smells the shirt.
Yeah, smells the jacket and says, you know something? You don't sound like Esau, but you smell like him.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like him. Okay? And Isaac, just to make sure, says one last time, now son, you're talking to your dad, and I'm about to die. Are you really my son, Esau? And Jacob looks into the eyes of his dying father and says,
I
am. Yes.
is that
Yes, I am. Whoa. Okay. And so he eats the meal, right? And brings wine, and Isaac drinks, which doesn't help the situation. And what ends up happening?
He receives blessing from his
Isaac ends up blessing the one he thinks is Esau. And what blessing does he offer? Man, it's a good one, right? What is the blessing?
The Lord.
It's you've got it made. And even beyond that, your brothers are going to what? Your brothers are going to bow before you. And anyone who curses you is cursed. And anyone who blesses, curse be anyone you curse, and bless be anyone you bless. So what does this mean for Jacob? When his dad finishes this up, what does it mean for Jacob?
He's set for life.
He is set for life. Financially, politically, and spiritually. Set for life. And as soon as Isaac finishes blessing, Jacob, the kid that lied to him, who shows up? Esau shows up with his plate of food and brought it to Dad, and then what happens?
Dad has to tell him that he already gave the blessing to his.
Well, when Dad says, what are you doing? I already ate. Who are you? Well, I'm Esau. And what does it say Isaac started to do?
Cry.
He started to shake and cry. Because what does Isaac know now? He was tricked. He was tricked. Of course, Jacob won't trick anybody else. It's like everybody he runs into, he'll trick. And so what does Isaac have to say to Esau?
There's no more blessing left.
I've already given the blessing. I can't give you the blessing now because your rat of a brother stole your blessing, just like he stole your birthright. And so what does Esau want?
He asked his father, did he have more than one blessing?
You got to have something else.
Yeah.
You got to have. And what does Isaac do to Esau?
He says, you can't, your dwelling will be away from the earth. Which
Yeah.
is away from the dew of heaven above.
You're gonna have you'll have a tough life, but
When you decide to be free, you'll break loose.
yeah, you'll break
And
loose.
live by the sword.
Okay, you'll live by the sword. Now, one of the things I didn't mention when he gets the stew, they called because he sold his birthright. Esau acquired a nickname way back when he lost his birthright. Do you remember what the nickname was?
You know, right?
Edom. They start calling him Edom because that's the red stew.
Oh, okay, I
It's
wondered
Edom.
why, when you said
Yeah,
that.
called Edom. Everybody, we may not know the significance, but everybody who heard this story back 3,000 years ago understood. Who was Edom? It was another one of those kingdoms. Just like Moab and Ammon, it was another kingdom that surrounded Judah. And Edom was going to be the kingdom that they would have the most problems with. Edom was always going to be a problem for Israel and then for Judah. And so Edom was going to be, the Edomites were descendants from Esau. So again, this is a little explaining the political history, 1,000 years later. Also saying the origin of your country is a pot of red lentil stew. That's how your country got its name, which is pretty demeaning. But you're going to live by the sword, and you're going to break free. And that's going to be a problem. And it explains the political situation that Judah is going to face throughout his history. Edom is always going to be a problem. Sometimes Edom is on top, sometimes Judah's on top, but it's always going to be a problem, between the two. Okay. Now, this all happens. And what appears to happen to Isaac after this? Well, one, how does Esau feel about Jacob?
He wants to kill him.
Yeah.
Okay, he really hates Jacob, right? Because Jacob has stolen everything from him.
Yep.
Stolen everything from him. What is preventing Esau from killing Jacob right now?
His father.
Isaac's still alive.
What's that?
Isaac's still alive.
Well, it's kind of interesting because what does it say in verse 41?
Esau held a grudge against Jacob.
Yeah, this is my chart. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching, then I will kill my brother Jacob. What appears to have happened? If he says, when my mourning for my father is over.
He died.
Would sure appear that Isaac died. And that's why Esau's not killing Jacob. Because they're in a time of mourning. But once that time of mourning is over, then Jacob's going to be yesterday's news. I'm going to get even. And who seems to know that?
Rebekah.
Rebekah knows that. And what does Rebekah do?
She sends him off to stay with her brother.
Yeah. While he is grieving, I'm going to send you to Laban, my brother, and I want you to. What does he want? What does she want him to do with respect to Laban?
Hide.
I want you to hide out. I want you to lay low until your brother gets over this, and then you can come back. And I don't want to lose
Those sons.
you. Okay, so what does Jacob do?
He forms his-
Goes to Laban. Now, all of these have been Lord stories, right? Something interesting happens in verse 26. Because we would appear, when we get to 25, that Isaac's dead. And Jacob is gone because his brother's looking to kill him, right? What happens in 26? Not 26, 46. 46. Yeah. What's happening in 46?
Her son married another Hittite.
Okay, now we've got Rebekah and Isaac together, and what is the big problem?
Hittite.
Yeah, there's no problem about birthrights. There's no problem about blessings. There's no cheating of Isaac. There's none of that stuff, right? Now we've got a concern that Jacob is going to do what?
Marry a Hittite.
Is going to marry a Hittite, and what do we know about Hittites? They're no good, right? Rebekah says that's going to be the death of me. So what does Isaac do?
Send Jacob away.
Sends Jacob away. But before he sends him away, what does Isaac do? Right at the beginning of the new chapter. He blesses him. He blesses Jacob right at the beginning of the chapter. Wait a minute. Hasn't he already
Died.
won? Yeah, that becomes a problem. He's already dead, one, and he's already done what?
Jacob
Given it
He's already blessed him.
Yeah.
Which shows us what's going on here. We can make it very complicated. Can work to make it really, really complicated. Or we can simply say, which is, I think, the most reasonable answer, what's happening here? We got a different tradition. We got a different tradition. We got a different story about how Jacob was blessed and why Jacob ended up with Laban. In one story, he's with Laban because his brother's going to kill him. In the other story, he's with Laban because,
His brother instructed him.
yeah, his mom doesn't want him to marry a Hittite Canaanite. And he's going to be looking to get himself a wife there with the kinsman. Same thing. He's going to do the same thing. Isaac's doing the same thing with Jacob that Abraham did with Isaac. And what name for God is used in this little story? In this little episode? God.
Yeah.
God is used. So we've got, again, one of these Lord stories, God stories happening here. So we've got a different, evidently the redactor, the one who brings it all together, believes that both stories are necessary because they convey something important. We know that he's not going to just go, because we need to have the birthright stolen, we need to know Jacob's character. And how would you describe Jacob's character?
Bad.
His character is bad. It is a bad character. He is well named. He is a deceiver. He is a cheat. He is a heel. He is a lousy brother. He is a lousy son.
He's a bad person.
He is a bad person. He is a disgusting excuse for a human being. And he's also what? The one who will carry the promise of God.
Isn't that something?
Isn't that something? Isn't that something? Jacob. And Paul says, man, what does that show about God?
Compassion.
It is God's will that's being worked out here. It's not that Jacob had any positive qualities inside of himself. God is not choosing Jacob because Jacob is a good guy, or even has the potential of being a good guy. Because you know what? We'll read the rest of the story. You know, Jacob's never going to be a good guy. In fact, Jacob's going to get worse. This is like his high point. You know, he's going to be morally worse.
Oh my goodness.
Wait until his brother shows up again. You know, when Jacob's got his family with him. Oh yeah, he's really going to pull a Jacob then. He is not a good, yet he's going to carry the promise of God, because God's will is mercy and compassion, and it's going to be through that disgusting excuse for a human being that God is going to show mercy and compassion, not only to Jacob but also to Esau and to us. But we also need to know that Jacob is going to Laban to get himself what? A wife. He's going to go to get himself a wife. And then we have another little story about what Esau does. Like if we took this little bit out, verse 6 seems to go better at the beginning of the chapter. What does Esau do?
Marries a
He ends up leaving town and he finds who?
Canaanite wife.
Went to
Woman.
Ishmael. And Ishmael enters the story again and, has wives down there. Okay, and then Esau's going to sort of fade into the background. And the story is going to shift to Jacob. But who is really being described in this? Although we've got these human characters that do different things, this is not really a story about them. It's a story about
Us?
about God. It's about God. And God's going to keep his promise even to Jacob. Because next week we're going to look at 28:10 through 31:55. And each of these lessons I give a title. I give a title to these lessons. And this one I've been titled, the next one we're going to look at is Jacob is Jacob. Jacob is Jacob. Because Jacob is going to do exactly what we'd expect Jacob to do and worse. So
So we're gonna do what, 28?
we're going to finish 28 and then we're going to do 31.
30 and skip already.
No, we're going to do 30.
Oh, okay.
Through.
I picked me and skipped.
Yeah, we're not going to skip it. Okay. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together. Remind us that you are the one in charge. And that your will is going to be done. And sometimes your will is done through people and in situations that are not particularly savory, but your will is going to be done. Now, Lord, help us respond to you. Help us not to respond to the situations we see around us, but help us to look to you for guidance as we navigate ourselves through life. Help us to trust in your authority and help us rely on your promises as we go about living our lives. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Oh,